Hi all, I'm going to do a slightly different video today. It's going to be a very brief overview of e4 opening names, which is something I was thinking of but was prompted by someone on YouTube recently in my message box. So I'm going to look in particular at e4. So e4, what are the common responses and what are they all called? Well, we can look at the most common responses by following the pawns. So a6, has this ever been played before? It's called St George Baker defence. It was used by Tony Miles against Karpov successfully, so it's not as bad as it looks. It might have the idea of b5 later and bishop b7 and maybe e6 and a kind of French defence setup. Now let's look at the next move, b6, Owen defence, another rare bird defence, so the idea of finchetting the queen's bishop. And again, you might play e6 later, maybe bishop b4 and sometimes attack the e4 square. But these two are not really mainline openings. Now Sicilian is a mainline opening, one of the most popular and best scoring. The source of this content is Wiki, by the way. And there are many variations to the Sicilian, which I'll try and touch once we get this very brief overview of looking at the pawns. The caro-kann defence is a rock-solid defence which was used quite a lot by Karpov against Kasparov actually in some of the World Championship matches. So after d4, black plays d5, and it is a favourite of Karpov's, and it's got a reputation for being very solid basically. d6 is the Pirc defence, so it's sometimes known as the Yevmitsev or the Yugoslav defence. And often black plays g6 later and bishop g7. d5 is the Scandinavian or centre counter defence. It used to be fought in the times of Nindovic to be very bad because it was losing time with the queen. However, it's not as bad as it looks because often black can sort of kind of just play like queen a5 for example and then bishop a f5 and then get a sort of caro-kann set up with the pawns. So the loss of time is often balanced by how solid black's position is. And the Grandmaster Ian Rogers from Australia became a major exponent of this opening to revitalise it. So that's not as bad as it seems. e6 is a very, very popular defence, the French defence. So it's known for its solidity and resilience. So the French defence, the main lines of the French defence, after d4, d5, we have here knight c3, which is the Paulson variation. So now, three black major options here. Bishop b4 is the Winoa variation of the French. Knight f6 is the classical variation of the French. D takes e4 is the Rubinstein variation of the French. Okay, so that's the French defence, another major opening. f5 is just rubbish, you shouldn't ever play it, but it's called the Fred. g6 is called the modern defence. So black aims to finch out the bishop and pressurise the dark squares. It often gives white a big centre. There's a lot of variations in this. It is quite a popular opening, but not as popular as the French or the Sicilian defence. So h6 is something which Michael Basman would play, following up with g5 and bishop g7, perhaps c5 later. It's not as bad as it seems because it is a kind of dark square strategy, trying to pressurise the d4 square. Basman's crushed quite a few people with this, like playing g4 later, and white's positions often falling to bits. So these rare birds are not as bad as they seem. Now, that was a very, very brief overview. Let's focus in on some particular Sicilian lines, which is the most popular, one of the most popular replies to e4. So knight f3 is often played, and now here black's got a number of major options. e6 or d6 or knight c6. Let's choose d6, and after d4 white usually plays d4 to have this trade of pawns, the centre pawn for the flank pawn. And now here black usually plays knight f6 to attack that e4 pawn, so white plays knight c3. And now here, often the move favoured by Kasparov is a6 because it stops any bishop b5 checks. So Sicilian Najdorf. What other alternatives? An immediate e6 is the Scheveningen variation, but you can play a Scheveningen by playing a6 first. And so that's not as recommendable actually as an immediate a6. G6 is the dragon variation, known because the pawn structure looks a bit like a fire-breathing dragon with this fire-breathing bishop on that diagonal. So here, let's have a look. Let's say a6 then. And bishop e3 is the English attack because it was played by a lot of English GMs. Bishop e2 is kind of the classical variation where white plays quite modestly. Especially e6, this is the Scheveningen Paulsen classical variation. So white might castle and later play things like king h1, f4, f5. What else is there? e5, probably not very good. Hasn't got a name here. You've got to be careful about weakening the d5 square. So let's have a rewind here. Instead of d6, knight c6 is one of my favourites, but I'm not going to play it much this season. It can lead to the Sveshnikov variation after knight f6 and now e5. This is the Sveshnikov variation. So white usually plays knight b5 there, main line. There's a lot of theory on the Sveshnikov. So you see there's a lot of flavours of the Sicilian defence. So that's a very, very brief overview there. Now e5, the king pawn game is of course a major defence. After knight f3, knight c6 we have the Roy Lopez. So that's the most often played. In the 19th century there was a lot of favour for bishop c4. Now if black plays bishop c5 that's called the Gokyo piano. If black plays knight f6 that's the two knights defence. If black plays after knight f3 actually though, instead of knight c6 there's some alternatives here. f5 is the Latvian counter gambit. So that's the very aggressive attempt to maybe undermine white's pawn centre and get fast development if black can recapture with the bishop on f5. d6 is the Philidor's defence. That was used a lot by Lasker, one of the earliest world champions. It's quite a solid way of playing. So knight c6 is actually just the most common move. So that's a very, very brief overview of e4 systems. In later videos I'll hone in on particular defences. Let me know in your comments actually what areas you want me to zoom in on as far as e4 openings go. i.e. do you want me to look at the Sicilian, e5 or the French? But anyway, in summary and conclusion, I just want to say that the three main most popular in my view are the Sicilian defence, the French defence is very popular, e5 is obviously very popular as well, the symmetrical like king pawn game. So those are the three which I consider the most popular. Slightly less popular, the caro-kann or the Pirc defence or the modern defence. Oh, I forgot to mention actually the Alekhine defence, which was even used by Fischer in 1972's World Championship match. So the Alekhine defence, named after Alexander Alekhine, another world champion. So that's a very provocative idea of encouraging white to move the pawns forward, because black's biting in the centre. So so this is the Alekhine exchange variation. So anyway, so we'll go back. So basically, I hope you learnt something new from that, and if there is a demand for more opening videos which can zoom into particular lines, tell me which particular line. Also, I might do a brief overview of one d4 and one c4 if there's interest. Thanks for listening, and I hope that's given you a little bit more insight into the openings of chess with one e4 being played. See you on YouTube.